David had only lived on Maple Ridge Drive for 10 months, but in that short time, he'd become known for his quiet habits and his elaborate holiday decorations. It wasn't a display thrown together with plastic blow-ups from the hardware store. His decorations were an intricate mix of handcrafted figures, old-school string lights, and animatronic pieces that moved with subtle charm. Many of them had belonged to his father, who used to make the entire neighborhood glow each December. It was tradition. It was memory. It was something David didn't plan on giving up. Even if he wasn't the neighborhood's most sociable member, the display had taken nearly 3 weeks to assemble. Reindeer spun slowly on a track, a small train circled the flower bed, and vintage ceramic angels lit up gently under the porch. Children walking home from school would slow down, point, and sometimes wave at the moving Santa figure that turned to greet them. But then, things started going wrong. On a cold Tuesday morning, David stepped out to find one of the ceramic angels gone. The cords lay cut near the base of the porch rail. At first, he thought it might have been a prank. Maybe even a petty thief trying to grab something that looked valuable. He checked with the neighbors, but no one had seen anything. There were no footprints on the frosted lawn. No signs of a struggle or damage. Just the missing angel and an uneasy silence. The next night, David added motion-detecting lights to the porch steps. Still, nothing happened until Friday morning, when he noticed that the 2 reindeer sculptures he'd mounted near the sidewalk were gone. This time, the wires had been pulled, not cut. His mailbox had also been tilted at a strange angle, almost like someone had leaned against it while carrying something bulky. By now, he wasn't thinking prank. He was thinking pattern. When he approached a few of the HOA board members about the issue, including the overly involved woman named Karen who lived across the street, he was met with a mix of polite concern and subtle avoidance. That sort of thing just happens around the holidays, Karen said with a flat smile. You know how some folks get too enthusiastic. Or maybe you're over-decorating a bit for a neighborhood like this. David noticed how she said it. Not accusing him, not directly, but placing blame on his display for its own disappearance. He nodded slowly, keeping his thoughts to himself, but her tone struck a chord. The next night, he stood on his porch for hours, coat zipped tight, pretending to scroll through his phone while watching the yard. Nothing moved. No lights flicked. No shadows passed. Just stillness. By midnight, he gave up, locked up the house, and went down to the basement. He opened a crate labeled Dad's old gear. Inside were for trail cameras, originally used during their family's camping trips. He hadn't touched them in years. He checked the batteries dead. He recharged them, wiped the lenses clean, and began planning. The next morning, before sunrise, he slipped outside and mounted the first camera inside the rose bush near the walkway. The second went behind the hedges by the mailbox. A third was placed inside a hollow garden gnome. The last, smallest one, he tucked into a birdhouse, aimed directly at the porch. No one saw him do it. Not even the wind stirred as he secured the final lens. That night, all the lights on his lawn glowed bright and inviting again. He even added a new feature, a pair of oversized candy canes, lit in a slow pulsing rhythm. He sat back inside the living room, blinds barely parted, staring out at the quiet street. Somewhere out there, someone had been sneaking through his yard. Someone who didn't know they were now being watched, and he wasn't planning to stop them. Not yet. The next few days passed without incident. No decorations vanished, no cords were disturbed, and the cameras didn't detect anything beyond a few neighborhood cats and a curious raccoon. The stillness almost made David uneasy. He had expected something to happen right away, but the silence stretched out with deliberate patience. like someone waiting for him to drop his guard. Each morning, David sat on his porch with a mug of coffee and scanned the neighborhood. Maple Ridge Drive looked peaceful, trees gently swaying, joggers passing by, children on bikes racing toward the park. But there was one constant: the woman across the street. Karen had lived on the block for years and served as vice president of the HOA. Every morning, she stood on her porch wrapped in a red robe, sipping tea or coffee from a monogrammed cup. Her expression was hard to read, part bored, part observant. She never waved, but her eyes would occasionally flick to David's lawn before drifting away. If she noticed the return of the candy canes, she didn't show it. David found her presence more unsettling than he wanted to admit. She wasn't doing anything openly wrong, but there was something in her demeanor, something in how confidently she carried herself, how easily she dismissed his concerns at the last HOA meeting. That made her impossible to ignore. He didn't confront her. Not. Yet instead, he spent the evening reviewing footage. Most of it was uneventful. Wind brushing against the hedges, a delivery man pausing to admire the lights. The motion sensors picked up every car that passed. He fast-forwarded through hours of silence. And then, around 3:13 a.m., the mailbox camera picked up a subtle flicker. A figure emerged at the very edge of the frame, just a blur in the shadows before slipping out of view again. The person had come from the direction of Karen's property. David leaned closer, adjusting the playback speed. It was too dark, the angle too narrow. Whoever it was had known exactly how to avoid the direct sightlines. Only the barest glimpse of movement had been caught, a deliberate step, followed by the faint reflection of something metallic in the hand bolt cutters, maybe. Then nothing. No theft that night. No missing ornaments. Just a presence, a warning. David checked the other cameras, but there was no further trace of the figure. The next night, he repositioned two of the devices. He moved the birdhouse to capture a wider angle of the sidewalk and tilted the gnome slightly to aim toward the side hedge, where the figure had passed. It was a small change, but enough to widen the net. At the next HOA gathering, the discussion centered around mailbox maintenance and lawn height regulations. Karen sat at the front table, with her clipboard, speaking in clipped tones about keeping the neighborhood aesthetically unified. Then, without directly naming anyone, she mentioned how some residents might be drawing unwanted attention with displays. That could be considered excessive. David said nothing, but he noticed the two board members beside her exchange a quick glance, as if they knew exactly who she meant. As the meeting wrapped up, Karen approached him near the exit. Her tone was light, friendly, too light. "I hope your lights haven't been giving you trouble lately," she said. "They really are quite extravagant." "They're fine," David replied, watching her eyes for a flicker of reaction. "Haven't lost anything recently," she smiled. Not a wide smile, but a sharp one. "Good," she said. "We wouldn't want anyone to misunderstand your intentions." Then she turned and walked away. David didn't move for a long time. The cameras were set. The bait was in place. And now, he waited. The wind howled as the rain crept in. It wasn't a storm, just a steady, cold drizzle that darkened the streets and made the whole neighborhood look like a forgotten painting. David didn't mind. Wet weather gave cover, and that night, the yard was dressed just right for someone with sneaky habits. He turned off the porch light and left only the decorations glowing, casting long shadows across the slick lawn. He stayed awake at the window again. Hours passed. The flicker of holiday colors reflected softly on the glass as the town quieted down. At 2:46 a.m., his phone buzzed gently on the coffee table. Motion detected. He lunged for it. The camera feed was shaky at first, distorted slightly by droplets, but clear enough to show movement along the hedges. a figure slipped past the mailbox. Crouched low, they paused behind the shrubs, then darted toward the candy canes near the walkway. The figure wore a dark hoodie pulled tight. But it wasn't the clothes that caught David's attention. It was the hands thin, gloved, and steady. One of them reached out, holding a pair of bolt cutters. The person moved carefully, deliberately, as if they'd done it before. And when they lifted the cutters to snip a connection, a sleeve shifted. Just enough to reveal a patch on the upper arm dot. It was small, but it was clear. The HOA logo, stitched into the jacket. David hit pause, backed it up, and zoomed in. The grain distorted slightly, but the emblem was unmistakable. Then came the second clue, almost missed in the blur. The gloved hand briefly brushed back the hood, revealing a twisted ponytail, pulled to the side the same way Karen always wore hers. His breath caught. The figure worked quickly, unhooking the candy canes and stepping off the walkway toward the sidewalk. Another camera picked her up as she crossed the lawn. The rain caught the light just right, making her face momentarily visible. Not enough for a perfect ID, but enough to feel like a confirmation. David sat back in silence. He had expected mischief, maybe even spite. But the precision, the method, this wasn't random. It was routine, planned, and if Karen really was behind it, that meant something more disturbing than just neighborhood drama. It meant she felt safe doing it. The next morning, he didn't replace the candy canes. He didn't relight the deer. Instead, he spent hours reviewing every second of footage, isolating angles and timestamps. The pieces fit together, but it still wasn't solid enough to show anyone official. Not yet. He needed one last push. Something undeniable. So, that evening, he worked on a new idea. In the center of his yard, he assembled a new piece, bigger, brighter, and more tempting than anything he'd displayed so far. A fully custom-built snowman, 3 tiers tall, painted in glowing blue and white, rotating gently on a motorized base. It had blinking eyes and an old-fashioned top hat tilted at an angle. It was also rigged with a concealed proximity sensor. What nobody could see was the motion-activated flash unit he'd hidden in the garden nearby, and the silent trail camera mounted behind a tree, calibrated to capture still images the moment the sensor triggered. By midnight, the snowman stood alone in the yard, humming softly, lights twinkling in the drizzle. David sat inside once again, the same cup of coffee going cold on the table. He didn't want revenge. He wanted certainty, and he was about to get it. The cold settled in like a warning. Fog crept low along the lawn, wrapping the oversized snowman in a soft haze. The figure stood still in the center of David's yard, lit with just enough glow to catch attention, but not so much as to seem staged. The perfect bait, too unique to ignore, too tempting for someone who believed they couldn't be caught. David sat in the dark living room with all the house lights off, except for the soft glow of the camera monitors. The snowman's sensor feed blinked steady, still no motion. Hours passed. He listened to the creaks of the house, the hum of distant street lamps, the occasional gust of wind rustling the hedges. His coffee turned cold again. His fingers hovered near the playback controls. Then, at 2:27 a.m., the sensor beeped once. He leaned forward, heart thumping, as the image flickered. A figure emerged from the left edge of the camera's view, not rushing, not stumbling, calm, deliberate steps, black hoodie again, gloves, bolt cutters in one hand. They paused near the mailbox, scanning the street, and then slowly moved across the lawn toward the snowman. David didn't move. The figure stepped right up to the glowing display and crouched, inspecting the base. The camera flashed once, silently, capturing the intruder in full detail. The figure turned slightly enough for the camera to catch the side of their face. There was no mistaking it now. It was Karen. She moved with practiced ease, reached around the base of the snowman, and began to disconnect the cords. Another flash, another image. Still, she didn't flinch. She hadn't seen it. David didn't rush outside, didn't shout. He simply watched. And then, just as she wrapped her fingers around the snowman's midsection to lift it, David flicked the switch. The porch light exploded to life, flooding the entire lawn in white. Karen froze in place like a startled animal, eyes wide, caught mid-step with the snowman half raised off the ground. The bolt cutters clattered to the grass. David stepped out from the shadows of the front door, phone in hand. He didn't say a word. Karen stared at him, her mouth twitching, trying to shape a reaction that would make any sense. "This isn't what it looks like," she finally said, voice brittle. "You're right," David replied. "Come. It's worse." She backed away slowly, one step at a time. Her expression shifted from surprise to disbelief to something colder. Then, without another word, she turned and bolted across the lawn, disappearing around the hedge toward her own yard. David didn't follow. He stood in the glow of the porch, listening to her footsteps fade. Then he looked down at the snowman, still mostly intact, and bent to pick up the bolt cutters she dropped. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed. Rumors spread like wildfire. Someone had seen a shadow running. Someone else heard a noise. No names were said, but everyone seemed to know. Karen, however, acted as if nothing had happened. She stood on her porch, as always, sipping from her monogram cup. No wave. No acknowledgement. But she didn't look across the street that day. David didn't confront her. Not yet. He had something better than an argument. He had evidence, and he was going to use it when the time was right. Karen didn't waste time. By the following afternoon, David received a typed letter tucked under his doormat. The HOA emblem was stamped across the top, and the message inside was short, rigid, and full of careful language. According to the complaint, Karen claimed he had intimidated a neighbor in the early hours of the morning and engaged in threatening behavior that compromised community peace. David sat on his porch with the letter in hand, staring across the street. Karen was pruning her bushes, not looking his way. But she didn't have to. She had already made her move. He chuckled once, without humor, and went inside. The HOA had scheduled a meeting the following evening to address the issue. David didn't bother preparing a speech. He didn't need one. He spent the rest of that day compiling the video footage into one clean presentation. Each file was labeled, time-stamped, and overlaid with brief captions showing the dates of the thefts and angles from each camera. The best shots were saved for last. The flashlit images of Karen crouching beside the snowman, bolt cutters in hand, caught in high resolution from multiple directions. The stills were clear enough to see the HOA patch on her jacket and the tight twist of her ponytail poking out of the hood. At 6 p.m., he walked into the HOA boardroom with a flash drive in his pocket and a quiet expression on his face. The meeting began like most others, with procedural matters and a few grumbles about garbage pickup delays. Karen sat at the head of the table, composed as ever, her tone clipped and professional. When the complaint against David was introduced, she didn't even look at him. She read the printed statement aloud, citing concerns from a resident regarding late-night disturbances and behavior unbecoming of a respectful community member. David waited until she finished. Then he raised his hand. "I'd like to respond," he said. Karen nodded. "Briefly, if you would." He walked to the front of the room, pulled a chair aside, and placed a laptop on the table. No commentary, no explanation. Just a few keystrokes, and the footage began to play. First came the initial disappearance, the ceramic angel being taken at 3:12 a.m. Then the blurred figure passing near the mailbox. The stolen reindeer. Then the snowman sequence, shown in full. Gasps broke the silence when Karen's face came into view. Her eyes widened as the final clip played. There she was, frozen in the act, floodlight washing over her while David stepped from the shadows. No words were needed. Karen tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her lips parted, then closed. Her composure cracked for the first time since David had moved in. The board members exchanged glances. One of them leaned forward, folding his hands. "Karen," he said carefully, "do you have any explanation for this?" She opened her mouth, then shut it. No denial came. The room remained quiet for several long moments. "We'll reconvene in 10 minutes," the board member said. "Without you present." Karen stood stiffly, gathered her things, and left the room without a word. David didn't say anything either. He didn't have to. He just sat, watching the last frame of the paused footage on his screen. Karen's hand on the snowman. Eyes caught mid-dash blink. The board had seen the truth. And this wasn't over yet. The board didn't speak publicly about what happened that night, but the silence afterward was loud enough to be its own verdict. Karen stopped appearing on her porch in the mornings. The monogrammed cup disappeared. The red robe never showed again. Her house, once rigidly maintained with clipped hedges and decorative flags, seemed to dull overnight. The curtains stayed drawn. The walkway lights stopped turning on. David thought that would be the end of it. She'd been exposed. Her hold on the HOA had cracked. But one problem still lingered. He hadn't recovered everything she had taken. The ceramic angel, the reindeer, an old sled figurine his father had made. All of them still missing. He wondered whether she had destroyed them. But something about her behavior didn't match a vandal. Karen had taken the decorations with purpose, with control. She had been careful, almost rehearsed. Late one evening, as David raked leaves from the back of his property, a man approached from the alley. It was Ellis, a retired electrician who lived 2 streets over and kept mostly to himself. They had spoken maybe twice. David straightened as Ellis stepped closer, holding a folded photograph in his hand. "You didn't hear it from me," Ellis said, voice low. "But if you're still missing some of your stuff, you might want to look behind that woman's shed." David took the photo. It was grainy and taken from a distance, but it showed the side of Karen's property. The wooden fence was partially open, and behind it was a tangle of cords running into a gray shed at the far end of her lot. A sliver of something glowing red and green peeked out from under a tarp. That night, David waited until the neighborhood had gone to bed. He crossed the alley behind Karen's house and crept toward the fence. No lights on, no movement in the windows. The side gate was unlocked. Behind the shed, he found the tarp. His heart skipped when he pulled it back. There they were, his decorations. All of them. The ceramic angel sat near the back, unbroken, wrapped in a towel. The sled was reassembled. Its lights reconnected to an extension cord that led directly into the outlet on the side of her house. Even the stolen candy canes were carefully stacked, rewired to glow. They hadn't been destroyed. She had kept them, used them, displayed them in private. Behind a wall, like trophies, David took out his phone and captured every angle. He filmed the tarp, the cords, the plug, the full layout of the hidden shrine. He backed away slowly, careful not to leave tracks. As he closed the gate behind him, he paused. Something didn't feel right. He scanned the yard again, this time catching a second detail: muddy footprints along the back fence leading toward the alley, larger than Karen's. He hadn't been alone in discovering this place. The realization sank in. Karen might have had help. Someone had been out here recently. someone who knew what she was hiding. He left the alley and didn't look back. By morning, he had compiled all the new footage and photos into a second file. He didn't send it to the board right away. Not yet. Because the problem wasn't just Karen anymore. Someone else had been walking through the dark, and they hadn't been caught yet. The HOA board called a special session the following Tuesday, officially. It was to address internal matters regarding community trust. But everyone knew what it really was. Karen had been silent since her exposure, but her name still lingered in every conversation, like smoke after a fire. Some residents speculated she would resign quietly. Others whispered she'd fight back. David didn't care either way. He just wanted the board to see what he'd found behind her shed. The meeting took place in the small community clubhouse at the edge of the development. Folding chairs were ranged in uneven rows, and the air buzzed with quiet tension. A few residents showed up, pretending to care about the agenda. Most came because they wanted to see what would happen next. David arrived early, calm and composed. He didn't carry notes or speeches. Just the updated flash drive and a folder of printed stills from the hidden decorations. Karen walked in 10 minutes late. She wore all black, hair pulled tight, a clipboard clutched in her hand like a shield. Her smile was tight, stretched, forced. She didn't glance at David. She sat in her usual chair near the front and adjusted her papers like none of this had happened. The board president opened the meeting with a tone that was too cheerful for the room. Before we move into new business, there's a matter we've agreed needs discussion. David stood when prompted. He walked to the front of the room and plugged in the flash drive. No preamble. No small talk. Just the screen lighting up behind him with the image of the hidden decorations, complete with timestamps, cord trails, and wide shots of Karen's shed. He clicked to the next image, the interior of the shed, filled with his missing items, arranged like a private display. Then came the final video quiet footage from the alley showing the second set of muddy footprints, leading toward Karen's gate and then back toward the street. When he was done, David stepped back. He said nothing. Karen stayed quiet at first, jaw set, fingers gripping the edge of her clipboard. Then she spoke, voice brittle but steady. This is an invasion of privacy. He trespassed. That footage is illegal. The board president didn't respond right away. He looked down at the photos, flipping slowly through each one. When he spoke, his tone was low and careful. What do you call it when a resident steals property and hides it on their land and wires it into their own electricity? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again. Another board member cleared her throat. This isn't about footage. It's about the fact that you've been lying to the board, to your neighbors, and using your position to deflect accountability. Karen's voice cracked. You don't understand. His decorations were chaotic. Too much. They disrupted the balance of the street. I was trying to restore order. There was a long silence. Then someone from the audience whispered something too quietly to catch. The board president leaned forward. Karen, effective immediately. Your role on this board is suspended. You'll also be fined for theft, trespassing, and HOA code violations. Karen rose slowly, as if her legs were reluctant to obey. Her face showed nothing. She turned, clipboard still clutched to her chest, and walked out of the clubhouse without a single word. The door closed behind her. David remained still as the room exhaled. One board member looked over at him. You could press charges. I know, David said, but I won't. At least, not yet. Because the other set of footprints still didn't have a name, and he wasn't finished watching. The neighborhood settled quickly after Karen disappeared from the board and from sight. Her curtains remained closed, her porch unswept. Rumors said she was preparing to move, though no sale sign went up. Others whispered she was simply hiding, waiting for it all to blow over. Either way, her house faded into the background, the way an empty stage does after a bad performance. David's decorations returned to their rightful places. He restored the reindeer, rang the angel, even rebuilt the snowman minus the proximity trap. He hadn't intended to start a war, but now that the yard was whole again, it felt like a kind of quiet victory. Neighbors passed by with small nods, some even stopping to admire the display. Children returned to the sidewalk, pointing and smiling. As the little train circled the flower bed, no more pieces went missing. Still, David wasn't fully at ease. The second set of muddy footprints behind Karen's shed remained unexplained. He had studied the footage from that night repeatedly. They were larger than hers, slower. Whoever had been there hadn't stolen anything. They'd simply walked in, looked around, and left. No cameras caught the face. No one came forward. And no one asked questions. 1 week before Christmas, David woke to find something new on his porch. A box, wrapped in green paper, tied with red ribbon. No label. He glanced around. The street was quiet. No movement in the windows. He crouched and carefully peeled it open. Inside was the missing wooden soldier, one of the oldest pieces, hand-carved by his father decades ago. It had been cracked when last seen. One arm broken, the paint chipped. Now, it had been repaired. The arm had been reset and glued. The missing paint had been replaced with steady brushwork, clearly done by someone who cared about detail. There was no note. No signature. But tucked beneath the soldier was a clean envelope. Inside was a single photograph. A blurry image taken from behind David's fence, angled toward Karen's yard. It had been printed in low resolution, but one thing stood out: the faint outline of a second figure near the shed, face obscured by a hood, hands in the pockets of a dark coat. On the back of the photo, written in block letters, I told her it was wrong. She didn't listen. I fixed what I could. Georgia. David blinked. The name wasn't familiar. He checked the HOA roster. No George. None in the immediate households. But a search through archived minutes from past meetings revealed that Karen had once listed a co-owner of her home, a cousin, rarely seen, not listed as a resident. Quiet. Off the record. So, someone else had been involved. Maybe not in the thefts directly, but present, aware, maybe even helping at first. Until it went too far. David stood on the porch for a long time, the wooden soldier in hand. The cold wind nipped at his coat, but he didn't move. He didn't call the board. He didn't report the package. He simply walked to the center of the lawn and placed the soldier beside the angel, under the soft glow of the porch lights. That night, the full display shined brighter than ever, and for the first time in weeks, he saw movement in the blue house next to Karen's. A curtain shifted. Then, still. And somewhere beyond the hedge, quiet footsteps faded into the dark.